So welcome. I'm so glad to see you here, and what we are talking about today is the Rocky Road, and we're talking about it in the context of Independence Day because that's what we're celebrating this weekend. And speaking of which, I'm hoping to see all of you who can come at our party tomorrow at 7 at Judy's house. I so appreciate her hosting it. Thank you so much. It'll be way fun. We're going to have a potluck, and then we're going to see fireworks, so you're all invited to that. So today what I'd like to talk about a bit is our nation's journey to independence. Now, you may have noticed that I love talking about history. I just love talking about history. And it may be that I am a geek for history, and that is 100% true. But in thinking about it, I also realize there's another reason. To me, history teaches us where we have been and the choices we have made. Our spirituality is a function of our lives. So even if we're thinking about what we did when we were wearing knee pants and funny-looking wigs, it can still inform our choices today. I was reading Jack Kornfield's A Path with Heart, and what he says is you cannot divorce your spirituality from your life, from your activities, from your bodies, from your nutrition, from how we treat the earth, from anything. And I think we cannot divorce it from where we have come, which informs us where we are going. The lessons of history can elevate us, they can educate us, they can inform who we are as a nation, as a community, and as individuals. And that is the reason that I love to talk about it. We can see how events have turned out, the choices we have made, how they have turned out so far. And the reason I say so far is I never forget that as individuals, as a community, as a nation, we are works in progress. The story is not over. As a global community, the story is not over. Every day we are faced with choices, with uncertainties, with new decisions to make that move us along our path for better or for ill. And that is one reason that I love studying history. Here at One World, we're a community that believes in practical spirituality. We live our principles, we learn them, and we apply them in our lives, and they make a difference. They open us up to the truth of who we are, and they help us progress down our road of refining and unpacking who we are as individuals and as a community. We study the spirituality of being engaged, of being a part of the world, of being alive and being in action. Our spirituality can never be divorced from our lives. So, what are the principles that we try to practice here? Generosity, compassion, kindness, constancy, courage. These are not just values that motivate the actions of individuals. They are also qualities that can animate and elevate the life of a nation. And that's one thing we look at and we celebrate this weekend. The study of past events teaches us how the application of these principles, or the lack of their application, has made a difference in the lives of our global community, national and around the world. In other words, when we are looking for ways to live now, choices made in the past have much to teach us, and we especially know that this weekend. So, talking about July 4th, what can we learn from the events surrounding the birth of our nation? So we can forget in the middle of all the celebration, the fireworks, the parades, the floats, the barbecues, that our existence as these United States was far from a foregone conclusion. It's easy for us to think now that we are who we are, that it was inevitable, but it was not. As a matter of fact, as I was researching this talk, I realized how precarious our nation's birth was. Whenever you embark upon a new undertaking, it is uncertain. You don't know how the road is going to turn out. You don't know how it's going to end. The results are not guaranteed. And what do? You take that step anyway. We're all familiar with the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "Faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase." I remember when my daughter Catherine was young. Those of you who know Catherine know that she's visually impaired. She really can't see much of anything. But we had a slide at the playground, and it was a big, long slide. And she would go up to the top, and she could not see the bottom. But she would go and go, wham! She would have the best time because she knew that there was somebody to catch her there at the bottom. What courage. And sometimes when we head off on a road, that's what we do. We just sit on the slide. We just take that step. We just push off, not knowing where we're going to go or how it's going to end up. And I think that's what happened with our founding fathers. They started with no guarantee of how it would end. So let me give you some background. The battles of Lexington and Concord, the beginning of the Revolutionary War, took place on April 19, 1775. By the way, I'm not going to give you any answers, or not a lot of answers, that are in your trivia quiz, in your bulletins. I know it's a totally goober thing to do, but I had such fun doing those. I have the answers, and if you want them, you can see me after the gathering out in the foyer as we're drinking coffee and eating donuts. Okay, I encourage you to take it. It was way fun. By the middle of 1776, the colonies had been at war for over a year, and sentiment was growing increasingly strong to separate from England and to declare our independence as a sovereign nation. On June 7, 1776, Richard Henry Lee, who was a Virginia delegate to the Second Continental Congress, proposed a resolution that read as follows: that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. A revolutionary thought. Congress then appointed a committee of 5 to draft an appropriate message to Great Britain articulating those principles and giving the reasons why, and that document turned into our Declaration of Independence. On July 2nd, 1776, the Second Continental Congress voted to approve the Lee Resolution declaring independence from Great Britain. July 2nd. You're thinking, wait a minute, I thought we celebrate July 4th. This is the day in which our independence was actually declared. In a letter to Abigail Adams, John Adams wrote, quote, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival." Oops. 2 days off. However, we celebrate independence on the 4th because what happened on the 4th? Okay, this is one of your answers. Okay. That is the day on which Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. It was not the day independence was declared. That was 2 days earlier. It was kind of the day the press release went out. It was the day Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, announcing and explaining the decision made 2 days earlier. It's a little ironic that we don't celebrate the 2nd, but because the Declaration is dated the 4th, that's the day we celebrate. Another interesting fact is that on the evening of July 4th, 1776, about 200 copies of the Declaration were made by printer John Dunlap, who had a shop a couple hundred yards from Independence Hall in Philadelphia. There's another answer. This is definitely going to stop. This is the way. These copies, which were called Dunlap broadsides, is the way that the news got out, because we didn't have Twitter feeds, we didn't have Facebook, we had to get it out by horseback. In that age, ideas traveled as fast as a horse. So 200 copies were made and were distributed to the colonies, to George Washington, who stood up and read it to his troops, and to prominent citizens and other groups in the colonies to tell them the momentous event that had happened in Philadelphia that day. Of the 200, 26 remain in existence. Okay, this is another cool fact that has very little spiritual value, but I'm passing it on. Okay, so a printer's maybe it does. A printer's broadside is a large piece of paper. We've all seen them in movies of, back then. They're the large pieces of paper or whatever that are tacked up and that the public comes up and reads. Those are called printer's broadsides. Now, Dunlap's broadsides did not contain signatures. Why not? Because the Declaration was not signed on July 4th. It was not signed really until August. August 2nd is when people started signing it. Another interesting fact is that 2 people actually did sign it on July 4th, John Hancock, and I want to say John Adams or Benjamin Franklin. Okay, John Adams and John Hancock. That copy was rushed down to Dunlap so that he could typeset it, and it was never seen again. So John Hancock's original signature is totally gone. The version that everybody started signing in August was another version created for that occasion. So there are 26 of those copies still in existence. Until the 1980s, it was believed that there were only 24 of them, but one surfaced in 1989 when some guy in Philadelphia went to a flea market. The takeaway here is go to flea markets. Because this guy bought for $4 a beat-up old picture frame. As he was taking the paper off the back, he found an original Dunlap broadside folded up in the frame. He sold it to some guy for $2.4 million, who then sold it to Norman Lear at Sotheby's auction for $8.1 million. That is $4 well spent. So, I'm just saying. The 26th broadside actually was found in the British archives among some American papers that were kept after the war. Okay, so back to July 4th. This weekend is a time of fireworks and celebrations, parades, celebrating that we are among the freest and the most prosperous and among the strongest nations in the world. I say among, but that's a different talk. We're actually not. We're actually, in terms of a prosperity index, we're actually number 11. But we are among, and we have much to celebrate. But however strong we are today, however inevitable we think we were, we sometimes forget that we stand on the shoulders of men and women who back then faced complete uncertainty, who faced a future that they did not know if they were going to, as I said last week, hang together or hang separately. Our celebrations this weekend are a great distance in time from the beginning of the war, the dark days in which success seemed like a very long way off. We look at pictures of Washington today, George Washington, and he seems so certain, so assured, just the exact right guy in the right time who knew that he could take us to victory. Wrong! He was very uncertain about his ability to lead this enterprise. He reluctantly accepted the commission. As he told Congress, "My abilities and military experience," he said, "may not be equal to this extensive and important trust." So what does this teach us? Sometimes when you're facing the future, sometimes when you are handed something to do, sometimes when you know it is yours to do, you are not at all sure you can do it. But that does not mean you don't. It means you walk ahead and you try, and you trust in Providence to help you. Providence is back then what they called spirit, what we call it now. He reiterated his concern in a letter to Martha Washington, in which he wrote that his appointment to lead the nation's new armies was, quote, "a trust too great for my capacity." Think of this poor guy. You know, everything is on the line. Everything is like a laser focused on him. It's all on you, George. And he's going, holy moly, how do I do this? You take a step. You step forward knowing that you are called to do. It's like Winston Churchill said at the beginning of the Second World War when he was called to be prime minister. And he said he thought that all his life, all his background, all his training was nothing but to get him ready for this moment and this time and this test. And he met it, and so did George Washington. In the months that followed, Washington did not have a solid record of victory. Actually, I have heard pundits, maybe they're not pundits, maybe they're analysts, say that we didn't so much win the war as Britain lost it. But that's another discussion. Washington's army seemed on the verge of complete and total destruction every year after 1775. He sustained major losses in Brooklyn in 1776, heavy losses later in New Jersey, and the horrible winter of 1777 we now call the winter at Valley Forge. That followed defeat at Brandywine and Germantown. He was not doing a great job. He totally missed Britain's southern strategy, almost to the point that we lost the southern states. He actually was better known for handling adversity and for communicating strength in adversity and helping his troops weather it than he was for one victory after another. But I also remember what Winston Churchill says, you don't need to win all the battles, you just need to win the last one. And he indeed did that. But as late as 1781, Washington was warning his soldiers were exhausted. They were out of food, they were out of weapons. They were sick and they were hungry by the thousands. When they got discouraged, they just up and went home and lost heart. They did not have adequate clothing or weaponry. One of the things I found out that I thought was very cool, bless you, is that in the Revolutionary War, 90% of our firepower was supplied by France. Literally. If the French had not come to our existence, we would have fought the war basically smacking at the British with empty muskets. That's an interesting fact. So throughout the war, things looked pretty dark. But the colonists did not look back, just like Washington didn't look back. Why? They were courageous men and women who dared to travel this rocky road toward independence because they didn't just want freedom, like we may want a new iPad. They didn't just say, wouldn't it be nice? They went through that inner transformation that we talked about last week, and they became people who knew that they were created equal. In the language of today, they knew that was who they were. These were children of the Enlightenment. Do you remember a while back we talked about the Enlightenment, the age of reason? That was the age in which ideals of liberty, equality, tolerance, the separation of church and state, the preeminence of human reason over superstition and authority, those are the ideas that came to the fore. And our founding fathers and mothers were children of that philosophy. They knew that they were more. They were not born to be subjects to a monarch hundreds of miles away. They created a new identity of who they are. And once they had done that, they could not go back. That attitude, that energy, as we call it today, is what made the difference. A much later American, Wayne Dyer, wrote that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. You don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. So what does that mean? A while back I gave a talk called If Wishing Made It So. Remember we talked about that? If just sitting here and saying, wouldn't it be nice? No. You attract based on the beliefs and the profound convictions that you have internalized. When you see it, when you live it, and that's what these colonists did. They knew in their very souls that they were free people. And once they knew that, once they took a step into that truth, there was no going back. How could they go back? Once you have experienced such a profound inner transformation, then, or with us, how do you go back? You really can't. You almost don't have the choice but to continue on, because that is now who you are in your very soul. Remember last week we talked about Robert Brummett's book, Life in Transition? He said that inner transformation occurs and prompts the outer transformation. By the time the colonists got to actually declaring war, declaring the fight, they knew that they were different people. I remember a quote from Wendy Lustbader, who wrote, "This is how freedom begins. We have to dare to venture beyond the familiar landmarks of identity in order to locate the next version of ourselves." And that's really what a new beginning is. And that's what we ask ourselves. What is the next version of me? Now that I have ended, now that I have gone through the transition, what is my next version? Remember last week I said an interesting exercise to consider is to think that somebody else has written the story of your life up until this moment and you get to finish it. That is the next version of who you are. The next identity, the next adventure, the next challenge. And that can be uncertain. The uncertainty comes when we leave behind what we know to step into this new identity that awaits us. And that's what happened back in 1776. These brave souls were moving into the next version, not only of themselves as individuals, but our nation. They were moving into the next version of our civic life. They dared to venture even though they did not know what the landscape would look like, because they had no choice to turn back. They continued on into their new identities as individuals and as a community and as a new nation. I believe we can use this example in our own lives as we contemplate new beginnings and new identities. Leaving the known can be scary, it can be uncertain, it can be risky. It certainly was for them. When uncertainty knocks for us, we never know how events are going to turn out because we are not in control. We don't know. As Martin Luther King says, we don't know what the whole staircase looks like. As Catherine knew, I don't know what the bottom of the slide looks like, but I am going anyway. The change may be great, the risk may be substantial. But what do? We listen for that new identity that reflects the truth of who we are, and we move toward it with conviction, with certainty, and with belief. When we do, what happens? What do we believe? When we do that, the universe responds to support our actions, to open doors, to create opportunities that simply were not there before. Think of any great undertaking. It was powered by men and women who combined profound belief with persistent action. They just did not believe that they would fall short. Jan Phillips writes, to bring anything new into existence, to be a creator of circumstances, we have to imagine the new, and then speak the new, then usher it into reality with the fierce force of our belief in it. How cool is that? The fierce force of our belief in it. I kind of think that's what we're doing here at One World. We see it, we speak it, and then we usher it into existence with the fierce force that we believe in this community. We believe what we are doing needs to be done by us now and here. The universe responds to our conviction of truth. Remember Ernest Holmes likened creative mind to a mirror that reflects back to us the energies that we put out. We may not know the entire path. As Henri Nouwen wrote, we always have enough light for the next step. Sometimes I think we get all bound up because we think, I'm not going to take that first step unless I know the whole course. I'm not going to take that first step unless I know how it turns out. You are never going to take that first step. You may only know the next step, but you always have light for the next step. If you stop because you don't know how the whole darn thing is going to turn out, if you make the perfect the enemy of the good, you will never start. Sometimes you need to just step. Our uncertainty dissolves when we release our belief that we need to know it all, that we need to know it all now. We cannot let ourselves become prisoners of our need to have the entire course mapped out. What we do know is that the universe is working for our good. That's our foundational belief. We believe that it's all God, whatever faith tradition we follow. What that means is the universe is conspiring for our good. All it requires is for us to declare our intention, our belief in who we are, our belief in where we are going, before joining in to create a successful undertaking. We have nothing to fear. Our job is just to continue to take the next step in alignment with our beliefs, with the values that reflect the best in the human heart. Compassion, kindness, forgiveness, generosity, and peace. The universal energy, spirit, God, whatever, Yahweh, Allah, whatever you call him, her, or it, that animated and creates us, completes the work in ways that we are not able to see. So the changes we face, they may not be as profound as the Revolutionary War. I always remember that Zen phrase, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Things may not change other than inside. But that still doesn't matter, because inside you still have a new identity, you still have a new awakening, you still have a new way of chopping wood and carrying water and interacting with the world as you encounter it. We celebrate our ability to always renew, to walk through doors that continue to open as a nation and as individuals. So as we wind up, what I'd like to do is give you another example of another landmark event that took place on July 2nd. This event teaches me that our journey is never done, that we are always called upon to examine who we are, where we are going, and how we shall act. To live the values that define us and that animate us. On July 2nd in 1964, many years after those intrepid colonists, President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I don't think that's a coincidence. July 2nd, 1964. This landmark legislation, first proposed by President Kennedy, and after his assassination, President Johnson vowed to continue that journey. Outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And it was a huge step in beginning to address the systematic racism and oppression of African Americans that had occurred in our country and so tarnished the legacy of our founders. It's no coincidence this was signed on July 2nd. the day the Continental Congress declared our freedom and declared its allegiance to the principles of human dignity, equality, freedom, liberty, human rights. Those values continue to drive who we are as a nation, as free people, as individuals. The story is not over. And every day we are faced with circumstances which call on us to look, to check, to make sure we are living true to the values and to our beginnings, to the values that created us as a nation and that animate the best in our hearts as individuals. We always have the opportunity to open new doors to liberty, understanding, and human rights and these other values that reflect the best in who we are. Surely, as we go forward into our celebrations, that is something to celebrate.